Here's the third lie that I think sometimes singles buy. Listen to this one, because this might apply to some of us here, or somebody you know. You have a right to be bitter. You have a right to be bitter. Listen, there's more wounded people walking, there's more walking wounded around today than there have ever been. I have no idea what your personal history is. But I know that in this room, in a group this size, there are people who have been abandoned. There are people who have been deeply hurt. There are people who have been abused. There are people who have been betrayed. There are people who have been disappointed. People who have been rejected, passed by. And you have this feeling that, you have a right. Hey, after what you've been through, you have a right to be bitter. And you know what? Logically, maybe you do after what you've been through. There's only one problem. Guess who bitter hurts the most? Whoever you're bitter toward is doing fine. This isn't hurting them at all. It's killing you. That's the ugly thing about bitterness. They talk about holding a grudge. You don't hold a grudge holds you. It's like emotional cancer. It eats you alive. And you keep displacing this anger on other people who didn't do anything to you. Because the person you're bitter toward isn't here to do it to. So you do it to other people. And so it just chews up your own insides. The Bible says it very clearly in the book of Hebrews. In the Bible it says, see that no one misses the grace of God. How do you miss the grace of God? Amazing Grace, we've all heard that song. Well, how do you miss the grace of God? It says, do not let any bitter root grow up among you to cause trouble and defile many. When you let a little bitter root grow up to become a bitter tree, it will undoubtedly cause trouble and it will defile many. Do you know bitterness is the longest chain in the world? This is the ironic thing about bitterness. This person who hurt you, you can't stand them. But because of your bitterness, you're chained to them. You can't stop thinking about them. Duh. This person's ruling your life. Because you're chained to them by a grudge. You're chained to them by bitterness. And bitterness diminishes you because you end up having pity parties for yourself and nobody wants to come. Anybody here want to go to a pity party? I don't think so. In somebody else's honor, maybe my own, but I'm not going to go to yours. And, you start to get a negative attitude, and then bitterness isolates you, because who wants to be around Pigpen? Everywhere he walks, dust falls off of him. And some of us, we've been carrying a bitterness around with us, and because of that, we're like an emotional pigpen, and people go, here they come. Here comes the problem person. Here comes the attitude. And so we're creating our own loneliness. We're creating our own isolation. And it really depresses you. Some of us, our business card says victim. And you've been one. Maybe you really have been. I don't mean to make light of that. There are victims in this room. But it's a lousy identity. See, there is an alternative. A girl called up on our radio program, one of our live call-in nights not very long ago, and she called from a phone booth. And this is the first time she'd ever had the courage to tell anybody that her dad has been sexually abusing her for years. She snuck out to a phone booth and called. I could almost not hear her as she called in to say, how do you get someone to stop doing it to you? I got a letter, or actually we got a call 2 days later from a woman named Peggy who was in her 30s. She said, when I heard Mary talking on the phone, she said I had to pull over by the side of the road because I could so identify. She said I couldn't drive anymore. She said, my dad took me at the age of 9 from my mother, abused me till I was 13, until I was pregnant with his child. She said, I don't know where that baby is. I don't know what it was. She said, I left home because after that. She said, I lived in cardboard boxes. I lived everywhere and did everything you could imagine until I was 18. And something happened to her that John talked about here tonight. She had a personal encounter in her own heart with this Jesus that John talked about, and that changed her life. Peggy went on to say, she said, you know what happened? She said, finally one day I knew there was only one way I could get free from this thing that was chasing me. I had to forgive my father. Not because he deserved it, but so I could be free. I wanted to say, this is the first day of the rest of my life with him. See what forgiveness is not justifying the person or denying what they did. It's saying, I'll let God punish him instead of me. He'll do a much better job than you will. Don't mess it up. He'll do fine. I'll let God punish them. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to carry this around anymore. I'm not going to base the present and the future on the past. She went to her dad. She sought him out. She said, Dad, how do you feel about what happened? He said, I think it was your fault. She said, well, Dad, look me in the eye. Because I have made a choice. I have chosen to forgive you. She said, my dad didn't apologize to me ever before he died. But she said, you know what? From that day, I was free. She said, I didn't carry it around anymore. And because of that, she said, you know, the abused is supposed to become the next generation's abuser. She said, I've got 2 beautiful children, and it has stopped in my generation. I'm free because I forgave you. Did she have a right to be bitter? I think so. But she just couldn't afford the bill anymore. It's just too expensive. And so it is possible for you to make a choice and say, I'm going to end volume 1. I've read volume 1. This is the beginning of a new volume in this relationship. I choose to make this page 1 of volume 2 and let God take care of whatever the fallout is. Here's the truth. You have a right to be bitter. That's the lie. The truth is this. Your hurt can make you better instead of bitter. Mark told me, he's from this area. He told me a few weeks ago. He said, you know, I've just come through losing one of the closest members of my family and having a girl break up our engagement. He said, man, I know what alone feels like. I've never felt more alone in my life. But he said, you know what? I started to become bitter, but I know what I did instead? I decided that now I know how lonely people feel, and I'd hate for anyone else to feel alone. I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to making sure other people don't feel what I've felt. And he said, God, I want you to turn this into compassion. And he did. See, what you've been through, there's 2 things you can do with garbage. One is to just leave it there and let it, you know what happens to garbage, right? It'll stink to high heaven. Some of us, the garbage of our life, we have just let it sit there and rot inside of us, and it has started to really smell pretty bad. The other thing you can do with garbage is recycle it into something useful. I have to carry that stuff out a couple times a week in my neighborhood, I know. They can take that garbage and make it into something useful again. And I'll tell you, if you bring your hurt to your Creator, He can turn that hurt into sensitivity and compassion and make you a make-a-difference person because you know how hurting feels. And you become an ambassador to hurting people. You have just become better through it instead of bitter. Here's the last lie.